Hi everyone, this is Pierre from P2 Design. In this video I will show you how to blend terrain texture using 8 information and how to create and control a believable wet map. Let's get started. First thing we need are PBR textures. We can find Creative Commons super high quality HDRI and textures on Polyheaven. To download the texture, simply select the material you like. In our case, I will choose a cobblestone texture as it has a lot of bump. And from there, you just have to click the download button. I will pick and download a second texture so that we can blend them together. You'll find the link of both textures in the description. The textures are packed into zipped file, just extract them in a dedicated folder. You should find a bump map, normal map, displacement map, diffuse roughness and specular map in the folder. Let's open Blender and set up our scene. I would select everything pressing A and X to delete. Press Shift A and add a plane and make it 20 meters large. Finally, I will press Ctrl A and apply the scale. We will be using Eevee to preview our material, so we can switch to preview mode, and in the drop-down menu you can choose between different HDRI that are already delivered in Blender. To make the overall lighting a little more interesting, I will add a couple of point lamp, so I will simply press Shift A and choose point lamp. In the render preview we can enable light by going in the drop-down menu and click Scene Lights. In the light properties of my point lamp, I will push the power to 500 and choose a warm color. I will then duplicate this point lamp and choose a cold color so that we have a nice contrast. Then we need to create a material for our plane, so I will select the plane, go in the material tab and create a new material that I will call ground. To make our life easier, we'll go into the preferences and enable the Node Wrangler add-on. I advise you to have it enabled by default because it's so useful and it's shipped with Blender. I will give myself some room and open the shader editor. Thanks to the Node Wrangler, we can select our principal BSDF node and press Ctrl-Shift-T. It will automatically open the browser, go to the texture files and load all the textures of one of the materials. Blender will automatically generate the mapping node and plug everything in your principal BSDF. Wait for a few seconds for the material to compile, then you should see your PBR material all set up in the 3D view. If for some reason the shortcut doesn't work, click the Node Wrangler tab in the node properties and click Add Principled Setup. To get a better sense of scale, I will increase the repetition of the tiles by increasing the scale in the mapping node. I will set the value of all the scaling channels to 5. Now I want to import my second set of texture, so I will simply select the principal BSDF and duplicate it. And then I will press Ctrl-Shift-T again, go into the other material textures and select all the textures and load them. To be able to preview this new texture set, I will Ctrl-Shift-left click the principal BSDF node. You can use this shortcut on any nodes to preview the result. Blender will automatically set a viewer node, that is a simple emission shader, or if you do it directly onto a shader node, it will plug the shader node directly in the shader output. We can now preview our mud texture. I will set its scale to 5 so that it fits the other texture. We can see a bit of the influence of the displacement of the cobblestone texture, so I will unplug the displacement node from the material output. And now we can see our raw mud texture. So now we need to mix both of those. When we loaded our material, Blender basically loaded and plugged the base color, the roughness, the normals, but also the displacement map or 8 map. As you can see on this example, the black and white displacement map set the 8th of the texture or material. The darker the color, the lower the altitude, the lighter the higher. It will make sense to make our mud appear in the holes or the lower part of our cobblestone ground. To do so, the first thing we need to do is to mix both our shaders. So I will add a mix shader. I will plug in the first input shader, the mud Principled BSDF, and in the second input, the cobblestone Principled BSDF. If I Ctrl-Shift-click the mix shader, I can see the result. And now, if I play with the factor, I can see more mud or more cobblestone. This factor input can be triggered using color. We can use black as a value of 0 and white as a value of 1. So if I use a mix color going from black to white and I play with the factor, I will get the same behavior. Since I can use color to drive the mix, I can use the displacement map if I want. Be able to have a better control over the contrast of the displacement texture, I will add a converter color ramp. If I Ctrl-Shift-click the displacement texture, you can see how it looks. I can plug it into the color ramp, Ctrl-Shift-click the color ramp, and now when I remove the flag of the color ramp, I can play with the contrast of this displacement texture. Now I can use this as a mix factor for our shaders, and the dark part will reveal the mud shader, while the white part will reveal the stone shader. Now playing with the contrast, I can tell whether I have more mud or more stone. And this is how you create a basic 8 map blending. Now let's see how we can control the influence by painting a map. The first thing we need to be able to paint is to add a texture, image texture. I will click the new button and call this mask 8. I will keep it to black for the time being, and the current resolution is enough. And we need to be able to mix this texture with the color ramp, so I will press Shift A and add a color mix RGB. I will plug in the first input the color ramp and in the second our texture. I want to be able to darken and lighten the texture, so as a mix I will use linear light. The result gets a little burnt, because the algorithm may give us negative values. We can normalize the value from 0 to 1 by clicking the clamp option here. Now if I push the factor to 0, I get back to my previous result, and the factor to 1, I get full mud. This occurs because our texture is black. To be able to have a neutral texture, I will open the image editor. In my texture library, I will search for my mask 8. And in the end panel or properties panel, I will go to image and set its base color to a neutral mid-gray value, inputting 0.5 in the red, green and blue channels. By default, the color space of a picture is set to sRGB. We want it to be linear, so that our color doesn't get gamma corrected and thus our value modified. You can see the gray turned to a lighter color, but the values are still the same. With this setup, if I switch back to the 3D view and I modify the factor, you can see there is no influence, because the linear light mode, in a way, will ignore mid-gray tones. I set the factor to 1 so that we can see the influence of what we are going to paint. I will get back to the image editor and save the texture we have created. Note that whenever you are saving a picture, often Blender switches it back to sRGB, so I will have to set it back to linear. In the meantime, I will go back in the 3D view and switch to texture paint mode. Press N to display the properties panel, go to Tool and make sure that the mask 8 is selected. I will switch back the texture to linear, and now I can start painting in black and white. Whenever I will paint in white, I will get the cobblestone. If I paint in black, I will get more mud. But the trick is to use a very subtle strength. And you will notice that as you paint darker colors, the mud first appears in the creases and then slowly covers the cobblestone. So basically, it follows the 8th of our map to blend the texture together. Just play a bit with the painting. I advise you to get rid of the most obvious gradient between the two textures. Once you're done, make sure you click the Save All button here so that it will save your mask, and double check that your texture is still using the linear mode. And you are done with your custom 8 blending. If you want to learn character creation, rigging and animation and take your skill to a professional level, you will find extensive and top-rated Blender courses on p2design.com. Hundreds of professionally edited videos shipped with all the models, rig and Blender files. Use the code P2Design to get 10% off on any of the courses. To create a believable wet map, we first need to understand what happens whenever a surface gets wet. First, it's getting darker, so we can easily get this result by adding a color RGB curve and use it to modify the diffuse texture by simply pushing it down to darken the diffuse color. So I can duplicate this RGB curve to modify the diffuse color of the pavement. The other phenomenon when a surface gets wet is that it becomes shinier. Basically, the water covering the surface makes it less rough. So we can use the same trick as for the diffuse, duplicate the RGB curve and use it to darken the roughness texture. The darker the value, the closer to 0 it is and the more mirror-like it will be. From there I can duplicate the RGB node and use it to modify the roughness value of the mud. We are still missing a last effect, which is the puddle creation. As the water fills the creases, it will flatten our surface. So what we want to do is to modify our normal maps. The idea is to mix our current normal map with a neutral normal map. If I unplug my normal texture from the normal map node, the normal map node will expose to me the default color of a normal map. When using this color, the normal map won't have any influence on the normals of your surface. The color value to be used are 0.5 for red and green and 1 for blue. If you want further information about how a normal map is evaluated, post it in the comment and I will do a dedicated tutorial. In our case, what we need to do is just to add a mix RGB node, plug it into the normal map node, plug our original normal map texture into the first color slot, and in the second slot we will use our neutral normal color. From there, if I push the factor of the mix RGB node, the neutral color will replace the current normal map and it will flatten the surface. So now I can use this mix RGB node also on the normal map of the mud, and now the only thing I miss is a mask I can paint to drive all the RGB curve factor we have set on these two mix RGB nodes. It's gonna be easier than creating our previous mask. We just need to add a new texture, image texture, create a new one by clicking the new button. I will let it at the current resolution, that's enough, and I will keep it black. Now I can go to the image editor, open the current texture and save it. Now in the shader editor, I need to plug this wet map in the factor of all the RGB curve we have created, and also in the factor of the mix RGB nodes we have created to modify the normal maps. You can improve a bit your layout by pressing Shift A, go to Layout and Reroute to create those little dots that allow you to derivate a noodle. From there, in the 3D view, we can jump into Texture Paint mode, make sure that we are painting onto our web map. And as I will paint in white, it will start darkening the surface, reducing its roughness, but also flattening the normals. In this case too, I advise you to use a very low strength while painting, so that you can get very subtle variation on your surface. Once you're comfortable with this method and this mechanism, you can also use it to drive the displacement map of your material and use cycles through displacement. Don't forget to double check that your masks are using a linear color space so that you will have more subtle variation. Here is a screenshot of the final material, just capture it so that you can reproduce it. This is the end of this video, I hope you enjoyed it and I will see you in the next one.